So it is really, this kind of worrying is a completely useless pursuit. And yet, we feel a little guilty if we don't do it. Because it's somehow put into us that a proper amount of worrying is showing a good sense of responsibility. You're concerned. And Paul Tillich used this word concern in a special way. And Quakers always use the word concern. And all people, you might say, who are socially conscious are concerned. So when we say, I'm concerned, it means I have a frown on my face. And I'm worried about you, about the nation, about the war, so on. Concern. And Tillich said, religion is ultimate concern. I am concerned about the universe. And he used this wonderful decontaminated word for God, which he got from Eckhart, the ground of being. So God still has whiskers on it, but the ground of being doesn't. And so, ultimate concern is to be concerned about the ground of being. Well, now, I don't think I'm not sure about Tillich. I knew him, and he was a very wonderful man. But what I call concern, the way I would want to interpret it, instead of this sort of frown, is something more like amazement. In other words, that existence is extremely peculiar. I can't explain this feeling because I don't know quite how to ask a question about existence so that I could be said to be wondering about it in some sort of clear thinking way. This is a very nice thing to consider to yourself, that if you were going to have an interview with the Lord God, and you would have only 5 minutes, and you might ask one question, what would you ask? And you've got plenty of time to think this over in advance. And you realize, question after question, say, no, that's not really the thing I want to get at. Not that. Like, do you exist? God would say, well, of course. Yes, here I am. Am I having a hallucination? No. Well, how can I be sure that this isn't a hallucination, you see? And then you reject all that sort of question. And when you finally come down to it, you don't know what to ask. There is a sort of question in your mind, not so much a question as a questioning. A feeling of, it's all unbelievable. It's amazing. I wonder at it. I marvel at it. It is a miracle that there is anything. It's like a friend of mine who went to a Zen master, got an interview after he was troubled, an interpreter. And he sat down and said, now I'm here, I don't know what to ask. I just feel like laughing. And Zen master said, well, let's laugh. And they just broke up. So, but that feeling, you see, of the marvelousness of being is what I call, or would want to mean by Tillich's phrase, ultimate conceit. It's also love is involved in it. See, that's the part of the problem with an abstractionist culture such as ours. As I indicated, we are not materialists, we are abstractionists. A materialist is a lover, and therefore is somebody related to the present. Because, you see, you can't love except in the present. When you have under your hands a piece of wood, and you say, hasn't that a gorgeous grain? And you fondle it. It moves fondly. And you run over this and think, gee, isn't it gorgeous? Well, you're loving it. It may be that it's an apple, and you say, I love you so much I could eat you. And you eat it, and you relish it. That's loving in a special way. So, concern and love, and there are many forms of love. There's a whole spectrum of different kinds of love, which runs from the red of libido to the violet of divine charity. All of them are equally important, because, as you know, you can't have the violet end without the red end, and vice versa. You wouldn't know what violet was, unless unless you have all the other colors. The colors create each other. So it isn't simply black and white. Between black and white is the spectrum. And just as black and white arise mutually, so you know red in relation to yellow, in relation to green, in relation to blue, etc. But they all come out of black and white. That's the secret. I think Mr. Lamb, who invented the camera, made a rather spectacular demonstration of this. So, if then you try to obliterate fear, the fear that black may win, you're working in the wrong way. To attack a fear is to strengthen it. Because immediately you feel guilty if you don't succeed, or you feel inadequate. But fear is something that arises naturally and spontaneously under certain circumstances, just as you will feel warm if you get near a fire. And you can't go up to a fire without some sort of self-hypnosis and then say, well, I refuse to be warm. There's something a bit weird about that. Besides, you often want to feel warm when you get near a fire. No, on the contrary, it is very natural to be afraid. And so if you don't try to knock it down, you don't try to make yourself over into some sort of preconceived idea of what you ought to be, then you're on the track. Now, when you think, for example, that I ought to change myself into something different, what is the agency which will effect this change? Well, we could say two things. On the one hand, it's the same self that you want to change. So how can it change it? Or on the other hand, you could say that the idea that there is a sort of separate ego in you which can go to work on the rest of you is a hallucination. And that's why gurus and teachers set their students weird tasks in order that they may discover that the dissociated ego is indeed a hallucination. Now, for example, one of the ones that is commonly used is to get yourself a pure mind. And that means you control your thoughts and emotions. You mustn't have any violent or hateful emotions. You mustn't hate anybody. You mustn't have any sexy emotions. All pure ideas. Clean up. You know what happens? So many, in the parent-child relationship, many parents can't stand their children. They're a nuisance. They're the result of bad rubber goods, and they didn't mean to have them anyway. And they're expensive and noisy, and they've disturbed the peace of the place, and they detest it. But you cannot admit in this culture that you detest your child. That's the most awful thing. But you see, what happens if you don't admit it is that whereas outwardly you go through the motions of being loving and beautiful, you don't smell right, and the child gets it. The child knows intuitively and inwardly that there's a crossed-up message here. It says love, but it acts hate. Vice versa. A lot of children hate their mothers, hate their fathers. That's supposed to be very bad. And the whole pandemonium that's going on these days is largely due to that, but nobody can come out and be honest about it. So now, control your thoughts. Watch that hate. The moment it arises, dying. Knock it down. So lesson number 2 is relativity. Lesson number 1 having been the opposites in this course on cosmologic or cosmic gamesmanship. We were discussing the fact this morning that any manifestation of energy needs an opposition. In other words, nothing happens. There is no motion. There is no possibility of energy unless there is something opposing it. There is no dancing except on a floor against which you can push and move. And so, I pointed out, therefore the sense of self depends entirely on the sensation of there being something other. But that this is a kind of a maya, in other words, the general feeling that one side is definitively split off from and separate from the other is an illusion. But nevertheless, there is the opposition between energy and inertia, motion and stillness, is something that, as it were, is the bifurcation or two aspects of a single process. And we know it's a single process because they can't do without each other. If they could do without each other, then it would be a divided process, radically divided, split down the middle. But as it is, the interdependence of these two sides of things, or two ways of looking at things, shows that there is something in common between the two. And to understand this is the essential key to living in a sane way. Because if you're insane, you're split up. An idiot, you know, the word Greek idiotes means private, purely private, isolated, out of communication, out of relationship. And so this is a way of saying that insanity is a lack of awareness of relativity, because all existence is relationship. Now, if we can take a very fundamental illustration of this, I want you to imagine a universe in which all that there exists is one ball. This ball will, of course, have to be floating in space, because if there is no space outside the ball, nobody knows that it's a ball. There's no possibility of a ball which has no space beyond it, because then the ball itself, the solid material of the ball, would be all that there was, and there would be nothing outside it. So there would be no way of defining it as a ball. So there has to be, our universe, one ball in space, and the space outside the ball, furthermore, must be regarded as depending upon the existence of the ball. The ball and a space go together. Now then, however, there is no way of telling what this ball is doing, whether it's moving or whether it is still. It could be roaring through this space at thousands of miles an hour, and there'd be no way of proving it. There would be no air friction upon it. There would be nothing relatively stable with which its movement could be compared and against which it could be measured. So this ball has no energy. It can't even be said to be still. It can't be said to be in motion. And of course, this is the situation of the universe as a whole. In the beginning, one of the things that God said before the Bible started, the first thing according to the Bible was, let there be light. But actually there were several former pronouncements. One of which was, you've got to draw the line somewhere. And the other was, have a ball. And this is why most objects of celestial existence is spherical. Don't you think it's very odd to be living on a spherical rock revolving round an enormous spherical fire? This is weird. Wake up and find yourself in that situation. So, you said have a ball. Now, this is the fundamental situation. The universe as a whole is presumably some kind of ball. It's curved space, and there it is. And nothing can be said about the whole universe as to whether it is moving or whether it is still. It's neither. That's why the Hindus, in trying to make some indication of the ultimate reality, say it is not this, it is not that. It is not one thing, it's not the other. It doesn't exist, it doesn't not exist. It doesn't both exist and not exist. It doesn't neither exist nor not exist. So you can't say anything about it. Your tongue is tied up. That's why it is said in the Mumonkan, which is a great Zen text, that when you've attained enlightenment, you're like a dumb man who's had a marvelous dream. Everybody who's had a marvelous dream wants to tell everybody about it. But if you're dumb, you can't say a thing. So in the same way, the moment you realize that you are one with all that there is, well, it's this fundamental ball. And you can't say anything about it. Because it's moving, it is not moving. You can't think about it. And the reason you can't think about it is not because it exceeds you. It's because it is you. You can't get at it like you can't bite your own teeth. So then, if we introduce two balls into our cosmos, then we can say something about motion, because it is apparent that they can approach each other or get away from each other. But no one can say which one is doing it or whether both are doing it, because there is no way of determining it. One may be still and the other moving to it or away from it. Both may be moving towards each other or away from each other, but there is no way of saying which one starts. And furthermore, they can only move with respect to each other in a straight line. They have no possibility of moving on the surface. They have defined linear motion. Now we will introduce three balls into our system, and suddenly we find not only that they can move on a surface with respect to each other, but also that there's going to be a little fight start. Because if two balls stay together at a constant space apart, and one ball appears to approach them or to recede from them, well, here is the problem. Are the two standing still and the one likes them or doesn't like them, so moves closer or away, or is the one standing still and the two moving towards it or away from it? Well, there's only one way in this thing of deciding. Two balls that stay together constitute a majority. And according to the majority vote, they will decide whether they are moving away from the other one or approaching it, or whether it is standing still or whatever. Now then, the third ball, of course, can lick them by joining them. It can always stay, if it wants to, at a constant space from the other two, unless they break up and go off in different directions. So long as they stay together, it can stay with them, and then we are back to the original situation, so no one is moving at all, however much they move. Because the three constitute now one constellation, one triangle. All right, introduce a fourth ball. Now we have the possibility of motion in three dimensions. And you would say, well, now this is good, because we've got an umpire. Somebody who stands at the distance of objectivity and looks down upon those three balls and will decide which of them are moving and which of them are still. Very good, but the problem is which one of them is the fourth? Who's the umpire? Everyone is in a position of the third dimension to the other three. So everyone is both involved in the game of three and could be the external observer who is the umpire of what the three are doing. Now that is exactly your situation as being, sensing yourself as an external observer of the world. And this is a simple basic principle in terms of which all bodies in the cosmos may be understood. It's simply nothing but a multiplication of this situation. It's complicated, yes, so that you have to scratch your head to think about it, but it all reduces down to this fundamental mutual motion of balls. So, you see from this, what is the meaning of relativity? So, none of the balls, incidentally, have such a thing as a true position, because the position of any one of the four is where it seems to be from the different points of view of each member of the group. The members of the group can get together and agree upon a theoretical positioning of the balls, but they can never directly see all of the balls, including the one that's looking, in this theoretical position, just in the same way as you have a theoretical idea of the dimensions of a room, which would correspond to an architect's ground plan and elevation. You would say you know that that corner up there is a right angle, although you see it as an obtuse angle. Now this agreement as to what are the true positions of things is very important, because upon such agreement depends all possibilities of human communication. we have to have a standard of what is north, south, east, and west, of what is a unit of measure, of what languages and what words or what noises are to mean what experiences. And by constructing this conventional standard of measures, we are able to agree with each other. But one must see at the same time that this is a convention. There is no reason for driving on the right side of the road rather than the left, except that everybody must agree what side they're going to drive on. One isn't really preferable to the other. The point is to agree. So when we agree about certain social conventions, whether they be legal or moral or descriptional, aesthetic, whatever they are a construct. They are an abstraction. Say they're an abstraction, and this abstraction is never directly perceived, just as you cannot possibly go up to the ceiling to a position where you can see the whole floor as a rectilinear pattern as it would be drawn in an architect's booth. Your vision will always be distorted, if by distortion you mean departure from the blueprint. So then, except in terms of some sort of convention of this kind, there is no such thing as the true position of the four balls in space. Because you must always ask, when you ask about truth, truth for whom, or truth in relation to what standards. Now you see, when we measure something by inches, inch numbered 1 is the same length as the inch numbered 2, 3, 4, etc. When we measure things by the clock is a circle regularly divided into 360 or multiples thereof degrees. But I've often wondered whether it wouldn't be interesting to have elliptical clocks or May West-shaped clocks, so that certain times of the day would go faster than others, or slower than others. It might be very convenient to have the evening to last longer, slow time down for the evening, you see, speed it up at some other time. Why not? But you see, we try to fit everything into an ideal of regularity. Now the next point is that if relationship is existence, we are going to discover from this that the existence of any identifiable thing or event in the whole cosmos depends upon, and in an opposite sense is responsible for, the existence of everything else. But to do that, we've got to understand another image, which I will illustrate with the parable of a rainbow. Now you know there's an old philosophical conundrum. If a tree falls in a forest and there is nobody around to hear it, does it make a noise? This is a very simple problem, but it has been discussed in ways that make it very confusing. A noise is a neurological experience caused by a vibration of air interacting with an eardrum and an auditory nervous system. So therefore, obviously, when the tree falls, it will set up a vibration in the air. But if this vibration in the air does not pulsate upon an eardrum, there will be no noise. You can see it in a simpler way. What will happen if I hit a skinless drum? There will be a hit but no sound, because the drum has no skin. So if there is no eardrum, the vibrations in the air will not make a noise. I don't need to prove this any spookery about mind as distinct from matter or anything like that. It's quite straightforward. But now let's take the somewhat more subtle case of seeing a rainbow. To perceive a rainbow, there must be three variables present, three factors. There must A, be the sun. B, there must be moisture in the atmosphere. And funnily enough, C, there must be an observer at a certain angle relative to the angle of the sun and the moisture. The observer will, in other words, be standing, shall we say, on a straight line between the sun and the body of moisture, and what will then appear to be the center of the rainbow. That's why the side of a rainbow is always off to one side. You never see the side of a rainbow directly in front of you. So the position of a rainbow differs for every observer, just in the same way as that the position of this table differs for each one of you in the room. Depends where you're sitting. That's the way you see it. Now, the trouble with this illustration is that a rainbow is a rather diaphanous thing, and we tend to accord it a rather low reality state. And yet it fulfills all the requirements necessary for a genuinely existing thing. Oh, it's true you can't grab hold of it, but neither can you grab hold of the moon, at least not yet. Now, it has these criteria. It isn't a hallucination, because everybody standing around will curse and swear, and they see that at such a time and place they veritably do see this rainbow. So it's not like a ghost or a hallucination. But everybody sees it in a slightly different place. And you see, if there were no sun shining, there would be no rainbow. If there were no moisture in the atmosphere, there would be no rainbow. But let us suppose that the sun is shining and there is moisture in the atmosphere, but nobody is around. We only say with great reluctance that there would be no rainbow, because that way of looking at things upholds a particular mythology of the world. The world is something independent of us. This is the great superstition of Western culture, that the world is independent of us, that you don't make any difference to it. If there's something into which you come, it's going along and along and along, you come in and you look in the box and say, well, that's the way it is, and then they kick you out again. But now let's set up the situation in another way. Let's suppose the sun is shining out on the ocean somewhere, and I'm on a ship, and I could look over there and I'd say, my goodness, isn't this a nice day? If there was some moisture right over there, we would have a rainbow. And everybody says, well, there isn't one. It just does not truly exist that there is a rainbow. All right, the sun is shining out on the ocean, and there is some moisture. If there were a ship sailing near it so that there could be someone to see, there would be a rainbow. Now, in these two situations, they are both exactly the same. There would be a rainbow if there was some moisture around, but there isn't. And equally, there would be a rainbow if there was someone to see it, and there isn't. Those are two completely equivalent situations, because this isn't, again, a question of spookery. It's a question that the existence of the phenomenon rainbow depends on the presence of three factors. Like the existence of a human being depends on the existence of two factors, a man and a woman. Everybody has to have a father and a mother, or have had. And otherwise, with the exception of that relationship, you don't exist. Well, now, the case of the rainbow is exactly the same case as everything else. It's just because a rainbow is rather diaphanous and intangible, although it sure hits you in the eye. And the eye, the seeing, is a form of touching. Seeing is touching at a distance. When you find that the table is hard, that is a way of feeling with your fingers the same thing as that you cannot see through it with your eyes. So we are funny about this. Purely optical sensations are regarded as having a lesser grade of reality than tactile sensations. When you get hold of something and can grab it, and you feel it solid, you feel you are surer of its existence than if you merely see it. But it's all the same thing. Touch is a sensation as if your finger ends were full of millions of little eyes. Every nerve end an eye. And they close around this and they find it is not transparent. There is a limit. Here is something we don't go through. But that's exactly the same as when you see with these eyes here. You don't see through something. So then, the physical world responding to the sense of touch. I mean, it's another way of saying the table would not be hard, and is not hard, except when touched. It is the touch that evokes the hardness in the table. When it is not touched, it's not soft, it's not hard. It has no quality at all. Nothing which is not in relation to us has any existence, or, I will add, in relation to some other kind of responsive creature. Just in the same way that when light energy goes out of the sun into space, the energy will only be manifested as light if there is some body outside the sun to reflect the light. Otherwise, the light does not in any way illumine the darkness of space.
You've been listening to Alan Watts with part 1 from a seminar entitled World as Play. If you'd like the complete seminar on 4 cassettes of World as Play, you can get it by calling this number, 1-800-759-2887.